In these programs, we've talked a lot about thinking, both vertical and lateral. You said that you had invented a new word which was as basic to what you call lateral thinking as no is to logical thinking. What is this word?
That's right. I'll come on to the word in a moment, but let's just look at two basic words which underlie two of our thinking systems, if you like. First of all, the word yes. Now, in practice, the word yes is not just simply the absence of no, as it is in a computer. The word yes is really a very strong word. It's almost an emotional word. It's an affirmation, and we say yes, we really say yes, 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 that really is so. And in effect, the word yes is the basis of our belief system. The system, the ideas we set up, which we believe in, which we have faith in, this is sort of crystallized in the word yes, I accept, yes, I affirm, yes, that's right. Now, we've looked at the word no, which is the basis of our logical thinking system. Is it true, is it false, proceeding from one true statement to the other. Now, there's a third system left out, and it's a very large system. It's a system of which a lot of people are very aware. It certainly didn't need me to make them aware of it. It's the whole area which includes creativity, play, provocation, fantasy, poetry, where you set up ideas really to provoke different ways of looking at the world or other things. And, of course, art comes into this as well. Now, so we have this whole area, and people are aware of it, and people use it. But in a way, it's rather intangible. We can't really get hold of it. We can't really say, let's try and develop our thinking in this way. And so what I've done is to suggest that we create, rather deliberately, an operational word, just as yes and no are operational word, which will serve this area in the same way that yes serves the belief area, no serves the logical area. So I've suggested the word po, which serves this creative perception, lateral thinking area. And the rules in this area, of course, as we have seen, are very different from the other areas.
Well, and why, if I can ask you, choose a word like this? I mean, what's wrong with creativity, play, what did you say, fantasy, poetry? Why invent this word which either stands for post office or some utensil which isn't at all pleasant?
Well, I agree. I mean, inventing a word always sounds artificial and rather gimmicky and so on. But the reason for inventing the word is as a way of talking about the area and as a way of using a tool, of crystallizing what is otherwise a whole collection of rather vague attitudes and exhortations and we ought to be creative and so on, of crystallizing it into a tool which stands in value alongside the other tools we have, yes and no. So people don't need to be apologetic about their lateral thinking processes. And one of the striking things is people who've read my books, very creative people, artists, architects, and so on, come to me and they don't say, you have suddenly taught us how to be creative. They say, it's so nice to see down in print the way we usually think, and to realize that now it's a respectable form of thinking. It's not something we have to apologize for and pretend we've been thinking logically. So really Poe is to crystallize a process and make it tangible and respectable. Now, I'm not saying that people have had to wait for Poe or lateral thinking to be creative. Certain people always have been creative. But usually it's been a matter of talent or egomania or something special to a particular person. What I'm suggesting is that if we actually create a tool which we can use and look at and practice and talk about, then this type of thinking may become accessible to a lot more people who don't have this particular eccentricity. So it's not inventing creativity, it's simply making it a bit more tangible to other people. And in any case, to escape from the rigidity of the yes-no system, it's no use saying, well, let's be more flexible. One really has to have an alternative. If you escape, it's much easier if you have a destination to go to, rather than saying, I'm running away from that place. So Poe acts as this sort of tool, this destination. But like any symbol, one doesn't have to rush around the streets yelling Poe at the top of your voice. It can be internal in your mind. It's a way of crystallizing or referring to things, even if you never actually use the word. Or even if you use the word and then drop the word but keep the attitudes. It's a convenient way of crystallizing, of transferring attitudes.
If you wanted a slogan, I suppose you could say, don't be no-faced, be po-faced. But
yes, I've heard that before.
Well, tell me, now we have the word, how do you use it in practice?
Well, there's a whole lot of ways of using it in practice, because essentially it's a discontinuity device. It's a way for changing patterns, moving from one pattern to another, from one way of looking at things to another, and there's a whole lot of ways one can use it. But I'll just illustrate 3 ways of using it. which in a sense are three basic principles of creativity. And the first way is where we use an idea purely as a stepping stone. The idea need not be right or even reasonable, but can actually be wrong or outright ridiculous. And in this sense, of course, Poe is much stronger than suppose and so on, which is rather a weak way of doing it. But we use this idea as a stepping stone, not for its own value, but to get to other ideas. So instead of looking at this idea and judging it, we simply say Poe, which means we're using it as a stepping stone. For instance, the factory problem, if you remember, pollution, factories putting out muck into the river, what can we do about it? And we said, let's put up the stepping stone, the idea Poe factories should be downstream of themselves. Now from that we can go very quickly, and this is in fact what did happen in practice when I was in America discussing this with people involved. Poe factory should be downstream of itself. You get the idea of the factory being in one place at the same time downstream of itself. So the first factory puts out the stuff, the second factory takes it in. From that you move very quickly to looking at a factory not as a single concept, but having an outlet pipe and an inlet pipe. Now all you need to do to make a factory downstream of itself is legislate that the inlet pipe must always be downstream of the outlet pipe. So it always gets a sample of the muck it puts out and becomes at least more aware of what it's doing. So you end up with a very sensible, very logical idea, having gone through a stepping stone which sounded quite outrageous. So the first basic principle is to indicate that you're using an idea as a stepping stone, purely as a stepping stone, not as a judgment situation. The second idea is that we develop ideas and new ideas by reacting to new contexts. Now, normally we don't come across new contexts because things exist in a certain way in the world, things exist in a certain way in our mind as we have experienced them in the world. So in order to create new contexts, in order to create new ways of looking at things, we often have to put together things which have absolutely no reason for being put together. If they had a reason for being put together, they would fit into our existing ideas, but we want to provoke new ideas. So Poe can serve to bring together two completely disparate things which have no connection, put them together, and allow ideas to develop. I was trying this out with someone one day, and he said, all right, he said, let's look at cigarettes. He happened to be smoking one. Let's put a word with cigarettes and see what happens. So I said, all right, let's put soap. Cigarette, Poe soap. What ideas come from it? And he ended up with a rather sweet idea that from soap he went to spring, to freshness and spring. He said, let's put flower seeds, garden seeds, in the butt of all cigarettes. He said, when you discard the butt in the garden or the park or something, from that a flower will grow. So just as animals disperse seeds in their excreta, so too would humans, which is a rather sweet idea, and of course technically quite possible, because the temperature in the butt is actually very low. So the second use is to bring in things from outside which have no reason for being put together. Instead of concentrating only on what is relevant, you admit outside things. The third use is to challenge concepts, to challenge the way of looking at things, but not to challenge them in terms of saying that is right or that is wrong, but to say, is that the only way of looking at it? You challenge the uniqueness of a concept, not whether it's right or wrong. Normally, in order to get a different idea, you have to show how you can destroy the existing idea, and then you move on to another. Here, you say Poe, which means, fine, that's one way of looking at it, without necessarily attacking it, trying to destroy it. Let's move on to other ways of looking at it. Let's challenge the uniqueness of that concept, not its correctness. You move on to other ways. If you don't like them, you don't turn up a better one, you can still come back to the original. For instance, if we were to say, someone comes up with a statement, everyone's entitled to a fair wage, you could challenge Poe fair. And you might turn up that, in fact, we could have two concepts here, a fair wage and a living wage. And maybe a lot of our troubles in industrial relations is that we think the two are the same thing. And often a living wage is really higher than a fair wage. And if we're trying to combine them as one concept, we get into a lot of problems. And from that, one can develop various ways of dealing with wage situations, which would not be possible if we just accepted the concept of a fair wage. So if really one had to summarize the general function of this Poe device, it's a discontinuity device for changing patterns, for snapping out of one pattern, getting into another pattern, or device for exploring patterns. The above uses are really just only some of the uses. For instance, in an escalating situation where one side does something, the other side does something else, and you escalate, you need some device to break the continuity, otherwise you just go on escalating. And I know one couple, for instance, who happened to read one of my books, and they used to have lots of quarrels before, and according to them, now the quarrels don't emerge, because at some point the wife just says Poe, which means fine, okay. It's a sort of internal shrug, which means I'm going to break the continuity of this situation. Similarly, when people are trapped in a particular way of looking at things which almost leads up to a neurosis or something, you need some way of getting out of it, other than by trying to reason yourself out, where you just get caught in the tangle more and more. Now, the reason why I invented the word Poe is not because I thought it's nice to have a word Poe and it's nice to invent a word. The reason is that the need for Poe, or some similar device, it doesn't matter what it's called, someone else may invent another discontinuity device. All I'm saying is that we really need a discontinuity device. And now the reason we need a discontinuity device is not simply that it's nice to have new ideas, or we need invention, we need generation of ideas, but that if the brain does work as a patterning system, and the evidence is that it does, then this makes it obligatory that we develop a discontinuity device. And really in our culture, because of the way it's based on certain religious concepts and otherwise, and the way it's based on the Greeks and the Renaissance and so on, we really have never developed a discontinuity device because we've devoted all our efforts in exactly the opposite way, which is to construct, maintain, preserve, refine continuity, which is fine. But in addition, we do need a discontinuity device. And we can see the reason for this in the next program if we look at two very basic and very different types of information system.
So Poe is revolution.
In a sense.
This seems so blissfully simple, it might really be the idea dreamed up by a child.
Well, this is quite true, and one of the reasons children do tend to be much more creative than adults is that they do often use ideas as stepping stones, not in a judgment situation. Now, of course, with a child, he may not be able to judge it because he doesn't have enough experience to say this idea is right or wrong. This doesn't matter. The end result is that he tends to use ideas as stepping stones. I'll give you a rather nice example which illustrates this very, very neatly. And I'd asked some children to design a machine for going over rough ground. And various of them turned up special hovercraft and special springs and sort of rotating discs and walking legs. But one child had a rather different idea. And he had this vehicle, this cart on its wheels, and in front of the vehicle there was a nozzle pointing towards the ground. And behind the vehicle was another nozzle. And what he said was that out of the front nozzle came something he called smooth stuff, which he poured onto the rough ground, and as the vehicle went along, this smooth stuff was sucked up the back for reuse. Now, obviously, at first sight, you say this is a silly idea because you could never get back all you put out and he'd soon run out of smooth stuff. In any case, what is this smooth stuff? And he's begging the question. So an adult would tend to throw this out. But he used this as a stepping stone. This child was about 5 or 6. Used this as a stepping stone to say, well, after all, in a caterpillar, track vehicle, a tank or something, this is exactly what one's doing. One's putting down smooth stuff in front and picking up that smooth stuff behind. And I've discussed this particular example with people who are very eminent inventors, people like Eric Lathwaite, the inventor of the linear induction motor and so on, who have been fascinated by it as an example of a process which they feel they often use of going through an intermediate idea which may seem very ridiculous and then extracting from it a function which makes perfect sense. And this is why children do tend to be creative, because they do this, whereas adults say at once, no, that idea is right or wrong. If it's wrong, throw it out.